Now let's take a look at the implications of the bill in a bit more detail. And joining me live from Abuja is the Director of International Press Center, Lanre Arogundade. Thanks a lot for joining us on the News at 10.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening. We're told that the bill is not meant to stifle press freedom. I mean, that's what we hear from those who are sponsoring this bill. But what's your impression of the bill?
Well, my impression of the bill is that there are sections of the bill that are capable of actually stifling the press. As a matter of fact, some of the sections of the bill that we find quite objectionable are the ones that seek to criminalize, journalism. And what do I mean by this? If you look at, section, 16 of the bill as proposed, for example, it provides that where, a journalist is believed to have committed an offense, that journalist could actually be subjected to what is called a reprimand, which to us is like a form of imprisonment. It also talked about some penalties. So if you look at section 19C of the bill, for example, it talked about the fact that in the course of their duty, the council could compel a journalist or journalists to hand over documents. As you know, this is like compelling journalists to disclose their sources. And this is a privilege that is actually protected by law. So if you check the Freedom of Information Act, for example, journalism is one of the professions that is accorded that privilege of not disclosing their sources. But this bill is saying that journalists could be compelled to hand over documents. Now, section 23 of the bill actually talks about imprisonment of journalists. It talks about fine where you commit an offense of about 5,000 or imprisonment for a period of 6 months. This is quite objectionable because, as you know, already in this country we have laws like laws of libel, laws of defamation, that if somebody feels defamed or libeled by publication in the media, that person could actually go to court. But now a council is about to be given power to sentence journalists to imprisonment. So for us, it's like this is not a council as such, but a law court that will exercise some judicial functions. Yeah, so when you look at these sections, there is also the section there that talks about the fact that if a news medium publishes something and some people are believed to have aided, maybe by mistake. So you talk of a broadcast media, for example, and a statement is issued by somebody else and the producer reads it, that person is quite liable.
Okay,
so for us, if you look at some of these sections, it's more or less an attempt to criminalize journalism.
Can I just cut in there?
Really accept that.
Yes, let me just ask you as well, because some of the reasons this is an issue for the media is regulation, and those who are sponsoring the bill are talking about how perhaps the media isn't as regulated as they should be, which people like you have said is not the case. Let me draw your attention to the section on the duties of the council, talking about monitoring the activities of the press with a view to ensuring compliance with the Code of Ethics of the Nigerian Press Council. So if they are to do that, this new council that they're expecting to initiate, if they are to monitor their activities, what then should be the role of the NBC, the NUJ, the NGE? Is that also a concern for you as well?
Well, it's a concern. Now, let me explain that in the media generally, there are two forms of regulation. You have what we call, self-regulation, in which case professional bodies in the media set up regulatory mechanisms. So, for example, the NUJ has a code of ethics committee. The Guild of Editors also have a code of ethics committee. The newspaper proprietors have what is called the ombudsman. These, are self-regulatory mechanisms. And, recently we had, drafted and endorsed by media stakeholders, the Nigerian Media Code of Election Coverage, which the President of Newspaper Proprietors Association referred to during the public hearing at the Senate today, which it's also a form of self-regulation by the media, saying that we do not want to be irresponsible in the reporting of elections. Now, the other type of regulation is the one that involves, government, that, you bring a kind of state, legislation. What we are saying in that regard really is that we do not want this kind of, press council that looks like a vestige, of the military period. But let us copy from best examples from other jurisdictions. And in this instance, we have cited the case of Ghana. Now, Ghana has a National Mass Media Commission, but that National Mass Media Commission is actually provided for in the Ghanaian Constitution, and that is in Chapter 12 of the Ghanaian Constitution. And what it says is that the National Mass Media Commission, in fact, what that section actually says is that the media must be protected from government interference. This Press Council decree does not protect us from government interference because a lot of responsibilities are tied to the office of the Minister of Information. Whereas in the case of Ghana, it says that even for state media, the managers of state media shall not be appointed by government. So there is a clear difference. And now the National Mass Media Commission of Ghana says that it shall investigate complaints against the media, mediate, and settle complaints. That is what we want. We don't want, a council that has the power, to jail journalists. We're not running away from regulation. Some of us have spent our lives saying that journalists must be professional. We must obey the code of ethics. So if we want to have, government involvement, then let us have a model that is acceptable to us. What we actually want is a constitutional guarantee of freedom of the press. And within that framework, within that context, have, a press council or a National Mass Media Commission to which media stakeholders, voluntarily agree. So in that sense, media professional bodies or media support groups like our own are not running away, from, regulation. But what we are saying really is that we don't want, a law that will be used, to harass, journalists or intimidate the media.
All right, thank you. We do hope to see how this all pans out and plays out in the coming days and weeks. The Director of the International Press Center, Mr. Lanre Arogundade, thanks a lot for joining us on the News at 10 tonight.